Ride the Cyclone, or as I like to personally deem it, Final Destination 3, the musical, is a dark comedy following the spirits of 6 teenagers that died suddenly and tragically when the roller coaster they were riding abruptly derailed. Although death is an unpredictable and undiscerning force, the 6 teenagers, Ocean, a straight-laced A-on-oral student, Noel, a gay man with an obsession with French cinema, Misha, a Ukrainian adoptee boasting a vicious temper, Ricky, a disabled boy with an immense fondness for all things nerdy, Constance, the nicest girl in town, and Jane, who was decapitated and had no one in life able to identify her body, are understandably a wreck at this revelation, only able to think of all the dreams they once harbored that will now certainly never come to pass. However, they are offered a sliver of hope in the form of Karnak, a run-down fortune-telling animatronic that just so happens to harbor real mystical power, with Karnak revealing that he currently has the power to bring one of the 6 teenagers back to life, the key word being one. In order to decide, Karnak requests that each of the 6 teenagers plead their case as to why they are the ones most deserving of resurrection, with the musical following each character as they plead their case. And while though mainly a comedic musical, despite having such dark subject matter, Ride the Cyclone manages to profoundly navigate its central question: what makes life worth living at all? In Ride the Cyclone, when the victims of the cyclone accident are informed they will have the opportunity to demonstrate why they specifically are most deserving of having a second chance at life, Ocean immediately launches into a song about how she is exactly what the world needs, because she's ambitious, smart, and has a 4.0 GPA. However, Ocean's song uniquely isn't centered on her strengths, which is what you would ideally want to focus on in the event you were marketing why you were the most worthy candidate, but rather what she perceives to be her classmates' weaknesses, with her arguing they would have wasted their lives even in the event they had theoretically survived. In Ocean's eyes, each was destined already to amount to nothing. Even when it comes to her so-called best friend Constance, Ocean brands her life as only amounting to being a struggling future single mother. Yet ironically, the things that Ocean weaponizes to brand her classmates as losers that will contribute nothing meaningful to society are exactly the things that keep society functioning. You need the jobs that Ocean brands as being evident of the employee's stupidity to keep the world spinning, versus people that stake their worth entirely on something arbitrary like grades that is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. If anything, the song does a fantastic job of emphasizing why Ocean isn't what the world needs, as she views the very people needed to sustain society as worthless, and the people that are incapable of contributing to this model due to disability as having lives not worth living. To put it shortly and somewhat bluntly, she's a social Darwinist, believing herself to be more worthy of life because she is just inherently better. Ocean is also a person obsessed with keeping score, perceiving life as a game to be played and won, even if it's potentially at the expense of sabotaging others, and is pleased initially with the way that she has presented herself. That is, until Karnak reveals that the person that will be resurrected will be determined by anonymous vote, with Ocean having effectively sabotaged her chances by squandering her sole opportunity to plead her case by mocking and teasing her competition. And to me, it's especially important this be the first of the 6 cases pled before the audience, because automatically it defies the expectations the majority of them will have likely held. When it comes to any sort of theoretical scenario where you are tasked with determining which person is the most worthy of life, we have a tendency to sort the available candidates according to their potential good over what they've actually been able to do. A 4.0 high school student with a promising future is often perceived as being a more valuable member of society than an employee at Taco Bell or a small-town waitress. But Ride the Cyclone encourages the audience to more closely examine the factors that actually matter the most. What has been done thus far with the time that's been allotted, and how could this theoretical potential they see be realized? What the world needs does a fantastic job of showcasing that just because Ocean bears the potential to have tremendous academic and professional success does not mean that potential is for the overall betterment of humanity. An idea reflected in the choreography, with Ocean only winding up on top due to her willingness to literally step on others' backs. Yes, she could theoretically be a doctor, and she could be a cold, detached, callous one at that, who doesn't take her patient's needs or pain seriously. And is that innately better? Now, I'm completely aware of the fact this all sounds extremely harsh towards Ocean, and so allow me to take this time and extend a slight olive branch. Ocean is a 17-year-old girl that feels deeply insecure in her identity, and has therefore made the decision to center it around measurable qualities like grades, ribbons, award certificates, and so on. While you would imagine this may be due to parental influence, Ocean's parents are actually described in the play as being humanist hippies, humanism being the idea that human beings have both the right and responsibility to shape their own lives. Humanism is also generally rooted in 4 core principles: human rights, free speech, progressive policies, and democracy. And what stands out to me the most about Ocean is that she genuinely believes she embodies these ideals when in reality, she has an incredibly surface-level understanding of them. To her, bringing Ricky in to be a part of the choir is a genuine act of disability advocacy, despite the fact that she believes that because Ricky is visibly disabled, he can't read, especially given Ricky has a passionate love for all things comic books, and she's likely seen him read on multiple occasions. While the surface-level understanding could partially be attributed to age, I think it's likely Ocean has a stunted understanding of humanism because her parents have a stunted understanding of it as a philosophy. When Karnak describes them, he doesn't actually describe anything they believe in. He describes the aesthetic qualities we associate with hippies, and that aesthetic alone. And if these aesthetic qualities are the extent of Ocean's parents' humanism, then frankly, it's no wonder she turned out the way that she did. However, I think it's equally likely that Ocean's mindset is merely a natural product of the world that we live in, and how that world typically attempts to define success and human worth. The mindset that Ocean has is not one unfamiliar to any child that has ever once been ascribed a gifted label, that because they uniquely are gifted, they are therefore automatically destined for greater things than their non-gifted peers, who, under the best of circumstances, are not to be emulated in any way, and under the worst, are to be outright mocked and belittled. Karnak also initially appears to have a similarly harsh outlook, and yet, as the musical progresses, it is overwhelmingly obvious the only reason he appears to antagonize Ocean in the way that he does is because he wants her to realize the truth, that the worth of human life cannot be defined by measurable qualities because all human life has inherent value. The entire game is structured in a fashion that reinforces the fact that Ocean's classmates have intimate hopes and intricate, rich, interior worlds much in the way that she does, even though none meet her measures of success, and she initially struggles to understand why they bear the dreams they do. Thus brings us to Noel Gruber, the only gay man in Uranium. And unlike Ocean, Noel isn't fixated on triumphant success, but rather tragedy. His lament isn't even about him. It's about his alter ego, a brooding, troubled, beautiful French prostitute named Monique. Now, Monique's imagined life isn't one I would describe as being overtly appealing. In Noel's imagination, she's addicted to opium and dies alone of typhoid fever in a filthy alleyway. And yet to Noel, this vision of life is almost enchanting, because to him, tragedy is preferable to apathy. Noel, like every other character in Ride the Cyclone, is trapped in a tiny, decaying town the overwhelming majority of them want nothing to do with, and Noel is no exception. The dull monotony of his day-to-day existence is the exact opposite of how Noel believes life best ought to be lived. Even the things that arguably should have made a difference in Noel's life, like his father leaving, made next to no impact, with Noel actually expressing disappointment that his father leaving didn't turn into or result in a tragedy, because at least that would have been a shift into something new. Noel's lament reveals that Noel likely initially learned to romanticize tragedy through consuming an ungodly amount of French cinema, which typically depicts beautiful women that live sorrowful lives defined by pain and turmoil. But although these women's lives are centered around suffering, they also contain an extraordinary amount of unique experiences and emotions that Noel has never had the opportunity to have for himself, and there's a tantalizing appeal to that. Ironically, prior to the Cyclone accident, it's actually implied that Noel aspired to die tragically young, because he believes doing so would allow him to experience life in a more fulfilling manner, only for him to discover tragedy isn't all it's cracked up to be. Noel is also implied to be so attracted to the taboo because, as previously stated, he is the only gay man in Uranium, and was likely ostracized for that fact. As Ride the Cyclone's sister play, Legoland, reveals that Uranium is in fact a deeply homophobic place, and it's a lot more difficult to construct and navigate your identity in a healthy manner when it's perceived as something automatically immoral. If your existence in of itself is perceived as being a social taboo, then why not lean into taboo as a whole? Fixating on these large, romantic, glamorized depictions of darkness and struggle allows Noel to effectively ignore the realistic tragedies his day-to-day life has been shaped by. Yet if the musical establishes that life's value cannot be defined by success, then it rapidly asserts it also cannot be defined by tragedy either, a lesson rapidly learned by the end of Noel's arc, in which he comes to the realization there was nothing particularly glamorous about dying abruptly, painfully, and young. The only thing he and his peers have gained is the question of what they could have been. However, Noel's song is the first that proposes the notion that life's worth can be defined by experience, providing a perfect segue for Misha. If we're talking tragedy, Misha's life and death are defined by tragedy to the extent that Karnak makes a joke about it at the start of the show, pointing out the reason that Misha acts so overtly aggressively is because he's a wounded child. And Misha has every reason to be wounded. His mother dies of an incurable and rapidly progressing cancer, and, in a desperate, last-ditch effort to ensure her son would be cared for, lies about his age to a pair of hopeful adoptees, who are less than pleased when they receive a cynical, angsty, temperamental teenage boy rather than the blank slate toddler they were hoping to have. There is nothing about Misha's trauma that is empowering or thrilling or glamorous, but there is some irony to it, in that Misha is a hyper-masculine character whose life and death are defined by complete powerlessness. In life, it's why he gravitates towards status symbols that affirm wealth and power. But in death, it's why he gravitates towards Talia, an online romance that constitutes his first love. Despite Misha's desire to emulate an extremely adult lifestyle, Talia showcases how innocent he truly is. The musical never confirms whether or not Talia actually exists, but Misha's choir mates seem fairly suspicious at best. However, nobody can bring themselves to say anything after seeing the sight of Misha the prospect of Talia teases out. To Misha, just the prospect of having a person to care for intimately and having a person to reciprocate that feeling is enough to get him to lean fully into this idealistic, romantic hope for the future. But to Misha, Talia is more than that. She is symbolic of a life and future he loved and wanted that was forcibly yanked away from him. Symbolic of everything he ever loved and held dear, and of everything he ever hoped that he could return to. She is the pinnacle of everything he ever hoped his life would be. It's why she is so precious to him. It's why he loves her without ever once questioning her authenticity, which is an incredibly vulnerable and trusting way to love, and the rest of the choir is aware of this. Now, an extremely popular fan theory at the time Ride the Cyclone peaked in popularity was that Talia was actually Noel attempting to catfish Misha. And what this theory is largely based off of is Noel's almost panicked response when Karnak informs Misha that he can show him what he and Talia's life would have looked like together. I strongly dislike this fan theory, because it frames what Noel is doing as something incredibly nefarious, when in reality, I think that he's trying to do something extremely kind. Many argue that Noel would never pass up the opportunity to lap up a tragic romance like this, of two lovers that can never be. But I'd argue it's precisely because Noel is a romantic that he wouldn't want Misha to see. Noel is cynical, and like the rest of the choir, very aware of the possibility that Talia doesn't exist, but doesn't want Misha to face the ultimate heartbreak of having the thing that he takes the most joy in ripped away. He's also very aware that Misha idolizes Talia, and likely doesn't want him to be disappointed by a less than ideal reality should they have gotten together. And as such a romantic, Noel would know better than anyone else that the way Misha loves Talia is very uncommon, and because of that, he would seek to preserve it. He doesn't want to have it spoiled by their harsh reality, but also he doesn't want it to be taken away from Misha, who has already led a life of hardship. A kind act that reflects a possible shift in Noel viewing life as something only worth being defined by tragedy to something worth being defined by human connection. And it's at this point we must bring in Ricky Potts, a character that many would have otherwise assumed would have been locked out of just that. Ricky Potts has an unnamed degenerative muscular disorder that has caused him to lose his speech and most of his mobility in his legs and lower back, with it also being implied that whatever disorder Ricky does have drastically lowers his life expectancy. People traditionally associate the inability to speak with the inability of having any higher cognitive functions at all, and Ocean, although well-meaning, initially starts out as one of those people. The other members of the choir don't seem to harbor this belief, but in the same breath, don't know how to approach Ricky themselves. Under the guise of being seen as accommodating, kind, and compassionate, Ocean speaks to Ricky in an incredibly condescending manner that implies that she views him as having roughly the same intelligence as a very small child. So when Ricky reveals that in the afterlife, he has the ability to speak in the way that he once did, Ocean has difficulties reconciling Ricky's true personality with the person that she knew in life. That being said, Ocean is almost immediately reprimanded for expressing this view, and Ricky rapidly displays a personality every bit as unique and memorable as that of his peers. Now, disabled characters have a tendency to be done extremely dirty by any piece of media that could be classified under the death game genre, because more often than not, their lives are distilled into these moral conundrums in a manner more dehumanizing than thought-provoking. But Ride the Cyclone manages to beautifully subvert this trope, actually making a point of stating that although Ricky led a life with a significant amount of hardship, he still led a life every bit as worth living as that of his peers, a life that he cherished and enjoyed. Although he found himself isolated more often than not, Ricky was capable of constructing otherworldly, fantastical universes he could find delight in, with him being able to find intrinsic joy in himself and in these fantasies. Ricky Potts is actually the one character in the cast that you could argue deeply enjoyed their life for what it was, and the character that died with the least regret, despite being the character that was most heavily pitied and perceived as not having any life worth living at all. It is for this reason that Ricky is the first character to concede, due to him feeling that he has already extracted all that he could possibly want out of life, and with him already being satisfied with the life that he led. There has been vocal controversy regarding this aspect of Ricky's character in the past, with many worrying that Ricky conceding feeds into the harmful trend previously mentioned where disabled life is treated as expendable and of inherently lesser value. However, the musical explicitly establishes that Ricky does not concede because he believes his life is expendable, or because he believes that he was already doomed to die young. It was because he was so immensely satisfied with it and fulfilled as a human being he felt content with remaining as he was. It's for this reason that Ricky beautifully embodies the answer to Ride the Cyclone's central question of what makes life worth living at all, the experience of being alive in the first place. Which brings us to the tragedy of Jane Doe. Up until this point, as each teenager has gone up to plead their case, we've gotten to witness how distinct and unique each of their personalities are, each having a memorable assortment of reasons as to why they deserve the second chance. Before each began singing, they also cranked a lever that showed baby photos and scenes from their childhood, to also showcase they had a detailed past as well as figureheads that would have mourned and remembered them. But not Jane Doe. Partially due to the fact that Jane was beheaded in the initial accident, nobody came to claim or identify her body. And to make poor matters worse, Jane Doe can't recall her name or even a single memory that might reveal who she is. Even when it's her turn to crank the lever, no photos of any kind pop up. The musical also takes pains to emphasize that Jane Doe's circumstances are far worse than her simply not being able to remember her past. She doesn't have a single aspect of personhood to identify with. She has the unique anguish of lacking both a past and identity while knowing that realistically, at some point, she did possess both of those things. And the biggest tragedy of Jane Doe is that she realistically shouldn't be a Jane Doe. She's in the choir the rest of her classmates were, and should have theoretically had a family that went searching for her after hearing about the accident, or at least a teacher that would account for who was there and who was not. But even when alive, Jane Doe is so insignificant to the people around her that her absence isn't actually noticed. Jane Doe was every bit as alone alive as she was dead, which ties into one of the most central themes of the show, that the most permanent form of death is to be forgotten. All of the characters in the show have people whose memories they exist within, and have memories they can live vicariously through, whereas Jane Doe has nothing to commemorate the fact that she even existed. There's something both heartwarming and heart-wrenching about the measures that Jane Doe's classmates implement to provide Jane Doe, in death, the closest thing to a tender, happy memory they possibly can. In what I consider to be one of the sweetest moments of the show, the choir throws Jane Doe a birthday party, bestowing upon her not only a birthday, but a name. This is the instance that to me best marks the moment the choir internalizes this idea that life's value can be found by the virtue of living. This guides us to our final contestant, Constance. Constance doesn't have the lofty fantasies of Ocean and Noel or a long-lost lover like Misha. All she has is a quiet, orderly existence as a waitress in her family diner. While she describes starting off life sharing the same pride her family did in their home, entering high school changed that, with seemingly everyone she met perceiving the town that she loved and the people that permanently resided within it as dingy, run down, and something to aim to distance yourself from, lacking purpose, drive, and ambition. Her and her family's very existence morphed into something to be embarrassed by and ashamed over. And the very qualities that Constance should have been valued for, her compassion, her sweetness, are viewed as being qualities indicative of weakness and vulnerability. Constance may be heralded as the nicest girl in Uranium, but she certainly isn't treated nicely by the majority of people that she meets. Her best friend perceives her non-confrontational nature as passivity, props her up as a scapegoat to pick on and belittle at every opportunity. She's raped by a man decades older who is keenly aware that she is too insecure and uncertain to say no. It's clear from her monologue that prior to dying, she was depressed to the point that she was floating around in a semi-fugue state, and whereas her classmates incessantly crave more of life, Constance has detached herself from it completely. It's not until the moment the cyclone derails that all the joy Constance had previously been detached from comes flooding back, and Constance recalls how everything she viewed as making life truly worth being lived at all were the mundane, intimate moments of day-to-day existence. Pizza parties, dancing alone in her bedroom, watching her little brother learn to dance. With her song marking the moment in which every choir member can dance as freely as they please, this is the moment where I would argue that each finds the peace to pass on, and grows to understand that the person that is most needing of a second chance at life is the person that never got to live it at all, concluding beautifully with Jane Doe's resurrection. Thank you so much for riding the Cyclone with us, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And here's an extra special thank you to our Patreons. What we do would not be possible without your support. Thank you so much for your time, and have a fabulous day.